most of us, because we know we've gone to the anti-CAIR site a million times. I mean, it's a great resource for us. But if you would be so kind as to basically lay it out for us, the lawsuit, what you learned from CAIR, and then your observations and conclusions.
Sure. As you mentioned, Andrew Whitehead was running a website called Anti-CAIR. Andrew is a U.S. Navy enlisted man, a veteran of 20-odd years in the service. And after 9/11, he became energized. And he started this website in response to what he was seeing from the organization CAIR. In January of 2004, CAIR sent him a letter threatening to take away his house and shut him down because, according to CAIR, statements on the website were false and defamatory. Andrew is interesting because the letter from CAIR said, first of all, shut up and stop publishing. And second, it said, if you tell anybody that we are threatening you, we are going to sue you. Right in the letter. So Andrew, to his eternal credit, said in effect, "Okay, guys, let's see what you're made of," and he posted the letter on his website for everybody to see. CAIR followed through, filed suit in April of 2004. We assumed the representation and immediately went after CAIR, trying to get information from them regarding their funding sources, their beliefs, the beliefs of its control group, its relationship to its so-called chapters all around the country, basically asking CAIR to open up its dresser drawer and show us whether or not the statements that Andy made were in fact false, as CAIR claimed. When you begin to shine a light under the rock, you see all sorts of very unpleasant.
What a sweet word.
Yeah.
Nefarious is the word I might choose.
These folks, the folks who ran CAIR, and this is what we learned during the course of the lawsuit, a lot of which, by the way, is public record. But really, the folks who run CAIR are very ideologically engaged. They come out of an organization called the Islamic Association for Palestine, which in its original iteration was a front for the Hamas movement. And when CAIR started, it really was part of an anti-Israel and I believe, based on the evidence that I saw, part of an effort to mobilize people in the United States, Muslims primarily, but also others, in an anti-Jewish movement. Over time, CAIR's portfolio, as if it were, has expanded because they found because they found this notion of being a Muslim advocacy group profitable in two respects. First, they were able to obtain a great deal of media attention. You have to understand this is basically a media organization. Its oxygen is the fact that reporters, most of whom don't know better, and if they do know better, they don't care, so to speak, calling these people up and getting quotes. Not because they necessarily represent Muslims in any grassroots sense of the term, but because they are effective at playing the victim and media game. And for a period of time, I will tell you, they were quite litigious, and they still are to some extent. They're behind the Flying Imams case in Minnesota.
Yeah.
But what's interesting to me is that after Mr. Whitehead's case, the pace of their legal filing slowed pretty dramatically. And in fact, CAIR's CEO, a fellow by the name of Nihad Awad, gave a talk at a Muslim community center in Northern Virginia at the end of April of this year, where he was asked basically, why aren't you filing more lawsuits? And his answer was, and this has been taped now and is out on the internet for everybody to see, the answer is basically, well, because the laws in the United States are such that people have free speech and they can say pretty much whatever they want to. Quite a turnaround from them, because prior to tangling with Mr. Whitehead, literally CAIR representatives were going to Muslim meetings around the United States and teaching people how to file lawsuits. I can tell you that in our case, we learned some very interesting things. We did a lot of good, and I found some things that were very distressing. One of them was, quite honestly, that there were very few people who would volunteer to step up and help Greenberg-Traurig with the defense. There were folks who made promises before the case was, before we assumed the case, and those promises were never fulfilled.
Why was that, in your mind?
Because people, I guess, had other things to do with their money.
Oh,
that they
that's a poor excuse. There could be better money spent.
Yeah, well, and that's what I certainly thought. And again, it wasn't as if we were looking to make money off the case. It was more a question of helping to defray some of the expenses, which the firm ended up assuming, and which we were going to do in any event. But it was very interesting to see the folks who were all very pleased to say, well, we'll be glad to go hold your coat while you go duke it out with these guys, but they themselves were not willing to get involved, even in the sort of extended way of writing a check. When we got involved in the case, as I mentioned, we very aggressively went after CAIR in an attempt to find out information that would have a bearing on the truth or falsity of the statements that Mr. Whitehead made. And those statements essentially were of two basic sorts. One, that CAIR was a terrorist-supporting front organization, essentially founded by Hamas supporters. And two, that it aimed to make Islam the dominant religion in the United States and overthrow the U.S. Constitution and install an Islamic theocracy in America. Those were the statements that were posted on the website, and those were the statements CAIR said were both false and defamatory. So they sued, and in defense, we then basically tried to get CAIR to open up its books and open up its travel records and show us that these statements were in fact false. CAIR didn't want to open its books and didn't want to open its membership lists and didn't want to make this information available.
I bet.
Primarily because it would have shown that, and my belief is that it would have shown that really everything Mr. Whitehead said was 100% true. There's certainly enough information in the public record to provide a basis for each one of the challenge statements made by Mr. Whitehead. And what we sent CAIR was a package of questions and document requests, really very extensive. In response, CAIR provided some very limited answers and a whole bunch of objections.
Shaka.
Yeah, and make a very long story short, we then filed a request with the court to compel CAIR to turn over the information. A hearing was scheduled, and shortly before the hearing, the case settled, and the complaint was dismissed with prejudice. The settlement agreement between the parties contains a confidentiality agreement, so and that's something I'm going to, and have respected, as has Mr. Whitehead. Kerry Hooper, Abraham Hooper, I guess is what he goes by. His name is Kerry. Has been quoted in a couple of places as saying that, well, they were the plaintiff and they voluntarily dismissed the suit and they got paid to dismiss the suit and so they won. So I think you got to sort of take that with a grain of salt. I mean, I guess they're willing to sell their reputation apparently and let people call them terrorists and so forth if they pay them a price. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. I think the question of who won is best answered. And it's not something you don't take my word for it. You can just look at their pattern of behavior and look at what they say.
Right. They
haven't filed any other defamation lawsuits since. And I quoted to you what Mr. Awad said, which is, in effect, there's no point in bringing defamation lawsuits because in the United States there's freedom of speech.
Right. Not that it's stopped.
So the fact of the matter is, my view, there's no apology, no retraction. The so-called false and defamatory allegations, the things that CAIR said were so terrible and hurtful, are still on the website. You have CAIR, basically stopping a what had been up to that point in time almost a tsunami of defamation lawsuits.
Right.
And no, I mean it's no. Mr. Whitehead won. I mean,
clearly
this was a knockout.